we were just talking about making our beds in the morning. We were actually relating it to strategic thinking. And both of us are old school enough to think about use paper and pen, and we make our lists. And even to this day, I make shopping lists, but I do it on my phone now because I carry my phone rather than 400 pieces of paper with me, so I don't look like a total nut when I'm in the grocery store. Just a half a crazy person, but
Mildly.
but what's interesting about all that is it's not because of habit. It's not because I'm 100 years old and this is the only way I know how to organize things. It's actually the way in which we organize our days. It starts as simple as the list, but you were just telling a story about making our beds. Uh,
Yeah, absolutely. And I look at it, it's like putting order into chaos and about setting yourself up for success. And the story is Admiral McRaven, and I forget the name of his book. He was the former commander of U.S. Special Operations Command, the famous admiral in charge when they got bin Laden in 2012.
yeah, now I
And
remember.
so he basically gave a great commencement speech, and his was saying, you start off your day. There are little simple rules. You start off your day by making your bed, not just because it's a good idea, but because you can look at yourself in the mirror and say, I successfully accomplished something today. So when the rest of the day does not go your way and
Mhm.
nothing works out and everything is a catastrophic um, problem area, and you come home to a freshly and properly made bed
Yes.
in which you can readily climb into, shut down the day, and
Yeah.
start again. But I
Yeah.
look about it, for me, it's all about how do I increase the probability of my success? That's not a question for me in
Yeah.
strategic thinking of I need to add more days or more
Yeah.
hours to my day.
No.
No, it's
No.
about how do I make the hours that are available more efficient?
Yes.
And one of them is, I don't know if you remember, there's an old, and I think it's the old Canadian Broadcasting Corporation little snippet called Hobby the Handy Cottager.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember, but he used to give these 5-minute things and it
Yeah.
would pop up on CBC, the original version of Shorts, I think,
Yes.
that's now
Yeah.
available on YouTube.
Yeah.
But it was like his mantra was 5 minutes of planning will save you 2 hours on the dock.
Exactly. Exactly.
And
You know,
and that 5 minutes in the morning with my coffee, as I take the tasks out of my phone, as I take them off my calendar, and I put them in a list
yeah.
and then go after and do some interesting
Yeah.
stuff with the list. It's just,
Yeah.
how do I increase my probability of success that day?
Yeah. It's interesting how something as simple as that it becomes part of uh I don't know, let's say the road to success. That sounds so highfalutin and obnoxious on my part. But at the same time, when I think of how I start my day, I'm actually at the point in my life where 4 to 5 hours of sleep is enough. So forget the 8 hour thing. Everybody says you have to do this. Well, I don't have to do anything. Right? I'm an obnoxious old curmudgeon. What can I say? So 4 hours, 5 hours of sleep. I'm very wary of that because if I go to bed too early at the end of a day that just, drag the life out of me, then I'm up at 2 or 3 in the morning because I've done my 4 hours and that's it. And so I try to avoid going to bed too early. But at the same time, I like getting up early in the morning, like putting my act together as quickly as possible, be out of the house by 6 o'clock, take public transit, buy blueberry lemon scones at Cobb's, which is, and then catch the bus up to the office, sit down, have my coffee, and eat my scones. Now, people would say, well, you're up so early by 6 o'clock, by 7 o'clock, you're at the office. You should be doing work. No, I intentionally do not do any work. Oh, I might do some Instagram. I might do this. I might do that. I might read the news. There are all kinds of things I'll do, but I won't work.
Yeah.
I won't work until I finish my coffee. And then on certain days I have to water the plants in the office, of which there are way too many. And then I'll sit down and I'll start working. What time do I start working? I don't have a schedule. When my mind, my head, my body says it's time to start doing something, then I'll do it. But I don't have that compulsion to, gotta be in there at, this hour in order to, do all this stuff. And no, no. And it doesn't mean, it's not necessarily a model for everybody, but I do highly recommend to people that they ease their way into their day, especially if they are in a high power job. I think you accomplish more.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm a huge fan of structure in the day, of some form of structure. And that doesn't mean a Jocko Willnick 0430 wake up and I'm in the gym. And every day on Instagram, he sends a picture of his watch in the morning when he's at 4:33, showing that he's up and he's getting after it, and you're not. So you're weaker and less of an accomplished individual. I'm a big fan of deep work,
Yes.
of the idea of deep work.
Yeah.
I get more done. I schedule one period of 2 hours of deep work per day.
Yeah.
That is a scheduled activity, not very much like you. It is not a time task. It's not, because I can't task deep work for 11 a.m., 10:30 a.m. I can't say, okay, shut everything down, I'm going into deep work mode. But I give myself one chunk of the elephant to chew every day. 2 hours, and I'm just as productive as I need. Now I'm all over Instagram and social media at other times. I'm creating reels, I'm posting that, long form videos, fun, enjoyable stuff. But deep work, I get one of those done a day, and the sense of accomplishment, because something I learned in the Army, and being an Army veteran, it teaches you, because there's never enough time to do what the Army wants you to do. It's just not possible. So they teach you something called main effort. And it basically means that the word priority cannot be plural. You cannot have priorities. You can have multiple activities that you're interested in completing or that you've been tasked to, but main effort, you're only working on one thing at a time. So on my vision board here that's off to my side, there's main effort, and it says the activity that I'm after. This is my deep work every day. I've got a bunch of regular stuff, Instagram stuff that I do every day. But every day I'm chewing a piece of this elephant, and it's the main effort. I'm not working on anything else. I've got a list of those ongoing interested, like you were talking about earlier, all those things you would like to do and activities.
Oh, yeah.
But I only can chew one thing at a time. And so I have the main effort. I have 2 hours of deep work. Sometimes that gets launched at 9. Sometimes it's not until 1 p.m. before that kicks off.
Yeah. It's not controlled by the clock. It's controlled by you. It's what you want to do. I'm not disciplined the way you are. I don't have that external organization that was part of my background that set constraints. We'll call them constraints. There's nothing wrong with the word constraint. We all live within constraints. I would hope so. If we didn't, then many of us would be able to fly off the balcony without killing ourselves. Gravity does exist, and gravity doesn't care. It's as simple as that. But my academic background is often enough what gets me going in the deep work world. I will immerse myself to the point where everything else stops. And this is not something I recommend. I know as we record this, I'm not recommending this to anybody because it's not normal. But then again, I never did admit being normal. So deep work for me, and I just came off of writing an entire program for delivery in Amman, Jordan, which is at the end of May. And you say, wow, that's nice. You really ended this. You finished the project. I said, no, 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 no. I wrote it. I must have who knows how many PowerPoint slides. There are 8 sessions. Each session is 60 to 90 minutes long. Okay, so this is not a small project. And I decided I had to write the entire thing from ground zero, not just take former slides and just, I did take content, but I just wrote the whole thing from ground zero. And this has taken me weeks and weeks and weeks, to the point where the typical academic writing a PhD thesis or any kind of paper that we would need to submit in order to get the pat on the head for being a good,
Good
post-secondary,
researcher. Yeah.
yes, post-secondary, post-secondary student. Um, it's that deep work where I actually found myself losing sense of time. And by that, I don't mean I gave up food. Who are you kidding? I like food. So at a certain time during the day, I would stop just to say, I have to eat. But I would lose days. I remember waking up, and I think you and I had this at one point where I said, today is Wednesday, when in reality it's Thursday. And I had people tell me, you do realize it's not Wednesday. You can't be sending messages, telling people to have a good Wednesday or a happy day or hump day, which some people call it, when in reality you already missed that.
Yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
and what I find fascinating about that, again, I am not advising anybody to do that, is that it gives me insight into some of the tensions around uh, people who are in the world of supply chain and logistics. All right. Often enough, people who work in the field, and I never worked in the field, are referred to as firefighters. Is that being immersed in the issue of the moment, which that moment could be days, not just minutes, and being so engrossed by it that all else doesn't matter. Of course, it is the end of the day. We are employees. We do have families and so on and so forth. So as I say, there are constraints, and they're real. However, it's that deep immersion into the need to handle something here and now, which for me translates as, I'm going to write an entire program from beginning to end, and I'm going to swim with sharks, and I don't even know that there are sharks. Whereas logistics people, the logistics, and this gives me insight, because I love logistics people, because they do what I call wackadoodle things, and they get caught up in it. Where's my driver? Where's my truck? Where's this? Where's that? Stuck at the border, not able to do whatever. And dealing with the constraints that I call it as sometimes crises. And they're
And
every,
it's a never ending series of
yes,
things. And one of the problems that the logistics industry has, and I did supply chain management and logistics in the Army for 20 plus years, is that strategic thinking isn't taught early. It's taught late in the process. So it's taught to the senior managers. And so as a lower middle manager in the Army running around, so
yeah,
I was in charge of the supply chain network in a foreign country
yeah.
during operations. I had no strategic thinking or
Mhm.
strategic strategy training. So I was running around with what we call in the Army helmet fires, and we would run around, and I was constantly chasing the whack-a-mole. I could hit whatever
Yeah,
I wanted, but it
yeah,
was always popping up everywhere, and I was
yeah,
never seemed to get ahead. But what I was able to do was keep myself from drowning. And so it was this consistent
yeah,
keeping the nose and mouth above the
yeah,
surface level.
yeah,
Well, it's like a duck. You look like a duck as a logistics
yeah,
person all the time. You're
yeah,
looking around, you're
yeah,
looking great underneath the water.
yeah,
Everything's going 100 miles an hour. and nobody sees it. And they never taught you strategic thinking,
Yeah. Yeah.
strategic planning, and the
Yeah.
link, they're not the same, but the link between those
Yeah.
two
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
never taught until later on. And
I,
so I'm there, you know, I'm not a quiet individual. I'm naturally frustrated. So I'm like, why are you telling me this now
yeah.
when I just lost how many years of my life hanging out
Yes.
somewhere?
Yes.
When I could have addressed all of this problem if I had just engaged in a little bit of strategic
Yep.
thinking
Yep.
in advance. And
Yeah.
this is why I now do my own work in my own company and the stuff I'm doing personally in a very deliberate fashion. I had an individual come up to me last week, emailed me while I was away and said, I got this great project idea. I said, fantastic. Send me an email on the 15th of June and we can get together and chat
Yes.
because I'm I'm full.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
full. I've made commitments. I'm
Yeah.
full.
Yeah.
It's an incredible opportunity.
Yeah. Oh, I can imagine. Yeah.
The gentleman's from South Africa
Ooh.
and
Interesting.
he's leading a pretty innovative and disruptive idea there that I would love to get involved in, but I
Yeah.
can't touch it until 15 June.
Yeah.
So part of strategic thinking and part of making your bed in the morning is something that I hammer away on all of my work is
Yeah.
personal
Yeah.
responsibility,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like the success of my day is not up to anybody but me.
Yeah.
And if I don't take, to use an army term, command and control of the
Yep.
day,
Yep.
then the day will command me.
I agree.
And it's the reason why in the military, you would go out and the first thing you do every day is your physical fitness and exercise to take
Hmm.
care of your own physical health.
Hmm.
Because if you scheduled that for noon, it would never happen because
Hmm.
the whack-a-moles would
Hmm.
prevent you from leaving your desk to go
Yep.
run around in circles for 45
Yep.
minutes, right?
Yep. Yep.
So we got up in the morning, we ran around in circles for 45 minutes, got had a shower, came to work. And it was funny because the in-office hours were literally only like 10 to 3.
Mm.
But in 10 to 3, once
Oh,
you've
yeah.
taken care of
Yeah.
yourself,
Yeah.
your own physical needs, and you're
Yeah.
focused, you're well caffeine fueled,
Yeah. That,
you're focused and you get things done.
yeah. Yeah. Part of this, just by way of extension, isn't so much how we organize ourselves, which is very much important. I mean, no two ways about it. I don't want to dismiss it. That's not what I'm doing. I am also thinking in terms of the what ifs. What if all of a sudden things just don't work? Those best laid plans of mice and men off go awry, as Robbie Burns would say, or had said. He's no longer with us. But when you think about it, and I'm not talking about you and I exchanged ideas around, trains blowing up and the fire on the train going in and around London when you were in London last week. And thinking that, a fire on a train, obviously not a passenger train, but on a train, is a major issue for quite a number of locations in Canada, especially new to my experience. I lived for a while in Hamilton. I lived for a while extremely brief while in Mississauga, which we won't talk about. And I live, I live primarily in Toronto. And what's interesting is, and have for a long time, but I grew up in New York City. And the closest vicinity to a train was subway. We're not talking about freight trains. There was no freight train anywhere near where I grew up. First time I came to Canada, I noticed there were freight trains go straight through the city. down at Union Station when I first arrived, freight trains still came into the downtown before they relocated all the freight up into Vaughan, which is northwest of the city. Um, Probably for economic reasons because it was too expensive versus for safety reasons. But the whole idea of a train passing behind you in your backyard, right? That is so foreign to me that I I I really find it marvelous on the one hand because I love trains, so I just go, oh look, there's a train, without thinking about, oh wait a minute, there's a train.
Exactly.
You know, and guess what? You have to cross those tracks in order to drive your car from one point to another point. I lived in, as I said, Hamilton, and behind me, there at the base of the so-called mountain, there are trains. There are train tracks. And you're going, oh, wait a minute, this is close to home. This. What's that vibration at 2 o'clock in the morning when the damn thing goes flying by? Yeah, it's the house shaking and the whatever dust coming out of the attic. Why? It's a train. And then we talk about various incidents. We could go through all of this. In 1979 in Mississauga, boom, there it is. We had chlorine gas. Chlorine gas in a residential area. 250,000 people have to move, relocate, go somewhere else. Why? Because they don't want you to die. Okay, thank you.
Pretty
And
important.
yeah, pretty important. Never mind the, Lac Megantic, where 47 people did die, on a July morning. We're talking about summer, and all of a sudden the train goes crazy and does its thing right in town. And I'm going, wait a minute. From my point of view, not so much point of view, my experience growing up, that's just so outrageous that I can't even think about how to handle something like that.
The reality is this country, Canada, was built on the railroad, right?
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
everything was
Yeah.
we expanded and constructed this company based upon the railroad. So every town is connected to the railroad.
Yeah.
And, even if you look, you don't have to look that far back. And in the 1950s, 1960s, when the real industrialization post-war happened in Canada, all of that freight moved by train.
Oh yeah.
It landed in the ports and it
Yeah.
moved by train. And
Yeah.
so you built your factories on the train yard at the outskirts
Yeah.
of the town
Yeah.
where people lived.
Yes. Yeah, I know.
Well, our towns are a freak bit larger than they used to be. So now
Oh yeah.
the urban area has totally consumed what
Yep.
used to be the industrial area. And now we have plants that use like the gases, for example, and I've looked at this working with the city of London. The gases and chemicals that are required to make beer at the Labatt's factory are pretty significant.
Oh
And
yes.
it's in downtown London,
I
right?
know.
And the
Yeah.
rail has to go through there.
Yep.
And London is the main rail route down from Windsor and from Sarnia, both
Yep.
in from the United States of
Yes.
America, with all those chemicals cross through
Yep.
downtown London.
Yes.
This
Yeah.
Lac Megantic was a horrible event that was the result of a whole bunch of really bad decisions by a
Yeah.
small group of people,
Yeah.
but it represents a risk that is very much the intertwined of our urbanization and how we operate logistics, right?
Yeah.
It's the
Yeah.
same reason why we say, well, why are disasters becoming so much more expensive, in the last decade or two? Well, that's
Mm.
because we keep building precarious things in dangerous
Yeah.
locations.
Yeah.
I mean, we can put our anthropological hats on, go all the way back to tribal society.
Yes.
Tribes lived where the resources were, right?
Exactly.
So
Yep.
if the food moved, you moved.
That's right.
Communication routes, as we refer to them in the Army, which is basically logistics transportation routes, whether they be rail,
Yeah.
which didn't exist in the tribal time. So you looked at roads
Yep. Yep.
or reasonably roads, but
Yep.
mostly waterways.
Yep.
This is why
Yep.
our cities are located where they are. This is why our civilizations, you wouldn't put Montreal there if you had to plan today. You
No.
wouldn't put Toronto where it is if you had to plan today, or Ottawa or Halifax. You wouldn't do that, but they were created because they need to be next to areas of commerce and quick
Yep.
access to
Yep.
import export. And
Yep.
so we've built that, and it took Lac Megantic is a perfect example of why we don't do well in fixing these issues. It took 10 years post that event to get the permit approved to
Yes.
build the rail line around the
That's
city.
right. That's
So
right.
for 10 years
Mhm.
after that disaster, those trains with the chemicals and the oil
Yep.
still ran through the
Yep.
town
Yep.
for 10 years after, because from a policy bureaucratic perspective, nothing moves quickly. But these are risks that so many parts of our population simply don't understand,
Yeah. Yeah.
that they are exposed to by the choice of
Yeah.
location where
Yeah.
they live, right? Toronto's huge. Toronto, well, if you look at the GTA, let's look at the
Yeah.
GTA, and we
Yeah.
won't say the M word, but if we look at the GTA, you there the hazard profile, as we like to refer to it in the industry, is not the same in every part of the GTA.
No. No. No.
But where you live, there's no such thing as a hazard-free, risk-free
No.
living and working location.
No. No.
So you will have a hazard profile
Yep.
irrespective of where you choose to live and work,
Yep. Yeah.
and the route in which you use to transport between those two
Yes.
locations.
Yes.
The problem is it's never been socially normalized to educate people on that, to make it part of our normal creature discussions, for lack of a better thing, to say, hey, listen, Victor, you live in a condo in this part of Toronto, you
Mhm.
commute to downtown, let's sit and look at the risk profile that you're
Mhm.
voluntarily
Yeah.
assuming by doing that. we
Yeah. Yeah.
we don't have that
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when you have a gas leak, ammonia leak,
Yeah.
something along that lines, people are going, well, how did this happen?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
I wish there was an easy answer for the how.
Yes. And the how becomes the operative question after the fact.
Yeah.
It was after the fact.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
how did this happen? Whoa, 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 wait, whoa, time out. Wait a minute. This is going to happen. Period. And one I was just thinking of this the other day. One of, I think, the great debilitating aspects of living in large social contexts, that is cities or otherwise, is that we work off of assumptions. The assumption is that if something happens, someone will take care of it. I don't have to. Okay. And the assumption of, let us assume, I don't know what the percentage is, let us assume that for the most part, assumptions work. If we didn't have assumptions, we would be living in fear all the time anyway. However, there are realities where the assumption just doesn't work. Very simple things. I live in a very high-end part of the city. Okay, no two ways about it. I live in Forest Hill. There are mansions in and around where I live that are 15 to 20 to $25 million if they were on sale now. I do not live in one of those, so let's make that clear. I live in a condo on the third floor of an old building. Um, uh, one of the assumptions is that because you live in a wealthy neighborhood, everything is going to be perfect. Everything is going to be taken care of because your taxes are going to be so high that all the infrastructure is going to work all the time. Well, it doesn't. Because one of the things about the neighborhood is that some of the infrastructure is so old and has not been replaced and probably will not be replaced ever, that when it clicks off, everybody goes, what was that? Now, what do I mean by clicking off? Well, the hydro transformer in the neighborhood is notorious for going blank, just blacks out. Okay. Oh, yes, within 5 or 6 hours, they'll come in and they'll fix it because they know they would probably be sued by some of the fairly wealthy neighbors. But at the same time, you could almost peg, not prepare, but peg when this is going to happen. The height of winter, because everybody's got their heating system on and it's overloading the grid. And the height of summer, because everybody has their air conditioning on and it's overloading the grid. Most often it takes place in the summer rather than the winter. And you go, this is not a such a unique occurrence like the Mississauga train chlorine gas incident. This happens frequently enough to be a pattern. Nobody talks about it. And the assumption is, oh, they're going to get somebody out there, and the technician is going to get the electricity up and running again, and I'm fine
Until the brownout happens.
until the brownout, and then it becomes blackout. And then if you're in the middle of writing your PhD thesis and you're on chapter 497 of 1,000-page thesis, and it goes out and you lose the entire thing because as academics, we don't necessarily save all the time.
No,
What do you do?
notoriously bad for that.
Oh,
Notoriously bad.
yeah.
Version control doesn't exist.
Exactly. Hence lack of preparedness. All right. Talk about
By
lack
far.
of preparedness, trusting with the assumption, trusting that the computer is always going to be working, and that's
Yep.
it.
I say that every time. If you think of the average person that get up in the morning and the assumption they make about the number of systems that they have absolute confidence that will exist, that will work as intended. When you turn
Right.
on your water, the pressure will be there. Potable water will be delivered by the municipality. When I
Right.
flip the switch, the power will work on. When I turn on the laptop or open up my phone, that my home internet system will be up and running and Rogers hasn't failed. Or if I put myself on the TELUS data network, I'm using them all because they all fail at one point or another.
Yes.
But we assume that the public, TTC will hit schedules on target like it always does.
Right.
But if you look through all of these systems at the average person from your banking app, you assume that when you go to the bank machine will work.
That's
And
right.
if that one's down, you assume you can go to the next one.
Yeah.
You
But
go to the store, you assuming the
Yep.
point of sale, buying your
Exactly.
scones in the morning will
Yep.
be functioning.
Yep.
And
Yep.
the Moneris and all the payment systems that are back ended to
Yep.
all of these point of sale systems will work perfectly fine.
Yes.
We make these incredible assumptions in our modern, technologically enabled and connected society every
Yes.
single day, but we don't afford a thought to what does my world look like when I
Yes.
no longer have access to one of these pieces of critical infrastructure. And these in Canada, there's 10 of them. In the United States, they classify it as 16. They've come out with a new set of nomenclature. They want to call them lifelines now. I don't ask me why. Just when you're starting to get people smart, we want to confuse them again. Typical government work.
Yeah.
But if you take 10 sectors that we have in Canada and you look at all of the different sectors, manufacturing is one of them, health is one of them. I mean, you're assuming the hospital will be open.
Oh,
Now,
yeah.
there are a lot of rural emergency rooms in Ontario that are closing down.
Yes.
Right? And you're assuming
Yes.
that when you dial 911, somebody will, number one, A, answer,
Yes.
and B, be able to provide some level of service to you. These are
Yeah.
all assumptions we make. And like you said, you're at, for the 93rd percentile of times, absolutely no issue, no problem. They're on time and on target. The Toronto Fire Department is structured to be able to handle its normal workload and the odd surge capacity for a major event. They've got it. So does the EMS. We'll leave Toronto Police aside. But those two are they're really built to deal with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
What we don't think about is when the big bad day happens, when you have a significant disruption that overwhelms what we traditionally call the first responders, right?
Yes.
A study I did here in in Ottawa, Ontario, where I live, on average, the on duty, it's about one first responder for every 5,500 residents.
Mm,
So, but that's okay for normal
normal.
activity levels based
Yes.
upon decades
Yes.
of experience.
Yes.
They're very good at scheduling human resources
Yes.
to a reasonable level. And the minor surge events, like when we had the tornadoes go through Dunrobin,
Yep.
the suburb of Ottawa, the city was able to handle it because there
Yep.
wasn't three other major structure fires happening at
That's
the
right.
same time.
Right.
So they could
Right.
take fire resources
Right.
from one side of the city,
Yeah.
deploy
Yeah.
them to the other,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and deal with a surge event.
Yeah. Yeah.
That could, all the wonderful hero photos with, 40 firefighters walking down around the rubble. That's great. Love it. Not a problem. That's manageable. It's what happens in days like the brownout that we had in 2003,
Yep.
uh, not too far off the SARS pandemic,
Right.
right around the
Right.
same year. And the power goes out, but it stays out. And you're
Yep.
on day 2,
Yeah.
3,
Yeah.
4.
Yeah.
I was up in Borden, Ontario on an Army course, and Army courses love it. Death by PowerPoint, right? It's
Hey,
nothing but PowerPoint.
listen, I used to teach part of those courses, so don't go
Yeah.
too far.
Okay. Death by PowerPoint. And it was hilarious because luckily for me, we had, let's call them veteran instructors, that when
Yes.
the power was down, they were perfectly happy pulling out the chalk
Yep.
and drawing it because they didn't have printouts. So they didn't know what
No.
was on the slides,
No.
but they knew what they were trying to teach.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
you
Exactly.
saw the people that truly understood
Yes.
and were
Yes.
knowledgeable in their area
Yes.
versus the people who were totally handicapped
Yeah. Yeah.
to the need and desire for
Yeah.
PowerPoint.
Yeah. There are so many stories that we can tell around this that bring home uh, some of the values that we're espousing in terms of even our discussion. The strategic thinking. We've got to get away from fearing that strategic thinking is done by C-level people. Strategic thinking is done by making your bed. We're making it, we're normalizing it in some sense without normalizing it from the point of view of assumptions. Because if you normalize it to the point where you can ignore it and just assume it's going to work, then you've discounted its value. But there are so many things where we have all had experiences, and I don't care who you are, I don't care how glorious and well kept and secure your world is. There's no such thing, right? Unless you live in a bubble somewhere, and you are not impacted by weather in any way, shape, or form, then I have no idea where you're living, but you're certainly not living in Canada
No.
because we have weather and it's real. When I first moved up here, one of the first things I realized, and Toronto was a blip compared to where I grew up. I mean, we're talking about the difference between New York and Toronto. And Toronto at the time was really small. You just had to look at the subway system. And I went, what is this? I realized that if you got to a certain point, what would have been called the end of the city, you were actually out in the country.
Yeah.
You were not urban. You were surrounded by open fields. And I haven't seen that since I was maybe about 7 or 8 years old, because New York also had its open fields in various places. But I realized that, and I actually remember saying this to my mother, God rest her soul, because she was worried about me. She said, I could probably die if I got stranded north of the city. And I'm not sure what would kill me, whether it be the animals that I don't know anything about, or I would just die of exposure because it's cold. We get real winter here. Now, okay, I mean, that's a stretch of a story, but come on, folks. We do get winter, and winter is real here. That's one of the first things that most new Canadians tell me, especially if they come from hot countries, like India or wherever, and they go, "Oh, I really wanted to move to Canada. It's just like on my radar and so on." And I said, "What time of the year did you come?" "January." "Really?" I don't know about you, but I think I would have picked a different time. And they
Eased
were,
into it.
yeah, they were shocked by, the fact that it's minus 30 and there is such a thing as snow. When I was doing government projects many, many years ago at the very beginning of the Logistics Institute, I used to go to Ottawa for quite a number of meetings. And I remember meeting people from all over. But Ottawa, and you may not remember this, I'm not sure where you were at the time, and I'm not even sure what the date was, but there was the ice storm that hit Ottawa, Montreal. And you say ice storm, what are you talking about? It's ice, you throw salt on and everything works. No, no. I remember talking to a young entrepreneur. He was from Montreal, and he had to, well, his business went bankrupt
Mhm.
during the ice storm. And he said, well, people don't realize, and what he did not realize is that he couldn't get into his garage because the clicker
Yep.
didn't work because there was no electricity. He said,
Yep.
I couldn't get into my house because it was secured and the security system locked me out. He said, the reason why he went bankrupt, actually for the most positive reasons, if you can consider it from a business point of view, he had people on staff that he continued to pay despite the fact that he had no revenue
Yep.
because he couldn't do anything, right?
Yep.
But he said they were in bigger issues, more important issues they had to face than I did. I have in-laws, I have my wife and her family, and so on and so forth. We survived. They were less fortunate from that point of view.
Yeah, that's not
Yeah,
too different as is a lot of the stories from the pandemic for
yeah,
small organizations. That I remember, I was fortunate to be on a call month two of the pandemic with the CEO of Rakuten, and he was a member of the small business group that I was a member of at the time, and he's talking about cash burn. He literally said, you know, who can't we lay off?
yep.
And then how much cash do we have what's our burn time? And he
Yeah, oh yeah,
expressed it as what's my burn
oh
time
yeah,
to burn through the cash that I have
yep,
before we have to make significant decisions. And a lot of businesses and entrepreneurs learned in that space of how influential government decisions and government policy can be on how they intend
yes,
to conduct operations. But again, how did we come out of it because of entrepreneurial things, from everything from vaccine to
yeah,
mask to shields
yeah,
to everything
yeah,
else? The
yeah,
entrepreneurs got us out of and
yes,
through the
yes,
pandemic, not government regulations and
yes,
government agencies.
yeah,
They solve, because that's what entrepreneurs do. They address and they solve issues in
yeah,
society,
yeah,
and they
it,
do very good at that. To circle back what you said earlier
yeah,
about strategic thinking and trying to get people persuaded of this. Something that I've started to do is I've started to call it designing your life.
mm,
And I'm trying to persuade this in the Gen Z, the millennial and the Gen Z, but more the Gen Z, which are in their 23 to 25 are the maximum age of the Gen Z right now, to say, hey, listen, you live in a digital world that I didn't grow up in, but you live in a world where you have the ability to design your life.
mhm,
And to design your life, you first have to accept personal responsibility for your outcomes.
mhm,
Then you have to look at the options that are out there. Then you have to do some type of options analysis. Then you have to make
mm,
decisions, which
mm,
is very much a reasonable proximity to what strategic thinking is.
yes,
But I'm calling it, I try to persuade it in some of the books that I write and some of the stuff that I produce is designing your life. You've got a roadmap in front of you. You've got a series of highways you could follow. It's up for you to determine which road that you're going to take and how you're going to do it. So sit down. It's free of charge, by the way. YouTube will teach you how to do anything, right? So sit back, take the time and effort, but not any money, because everybody's worried about the cost of inflation. So let's park the money aside, put the effort and design your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is kind of what I did without calling it that 2 years ago or 4 years ago when I retired from the military in 2019. And I thought this was funny, right? You'll find this hilarious. I was retiring in September of 2019. I thought I would get to sit home and learn how to be an entrepreneur, and I could laugh at everybody having to force to go to work, right? I thought I had it aced. This was my plan. I was going to rub it in that everybody had to go to work and commute. Doesn't a pandemic come along and all of a sudden everybody's at home working beside me? I'm going, this is
No.
not what I wanted retirement to look like. But
Yeah.
I'm into my 50s, just slightly younger than you. And I'm doing exactly that. I'm using strategic thinking to redesign my life and what the next road I follow takes. It's sometimes when you're reaching different generations, I find it's about not changing strategic thinking because it's not broken, but it's changing the label.
Yeah. Interesting, because you and I have discussed over many occasions, and we are going to move forward on this going into the future about creating a preparedness program. That's and I like that. Well, that's also the name of your company, or partially. What I find interesting about that is, and this is something for us to think about in terms of the language that we use. Preparedness gives one the impression that something is going to happen, and therefore you've got to be prepared in order to act and react in the face of something happening. Well, okay, yes, obviously. Otherwise, what are we talking about? If we were to take that approach and bring it up to another level and actually refer to this as designing your life, and preparedness being a critical or core factor in designing your life in response to the volatilities around us, we would have, those I like to think in circles. This is why engineers don't like to talk to me. I like to think in circles. They like to think in squares and lines, straight lines. And so in designing your life, it isn't necessarily a step-by-step process. It's identifying the key realities around you. What are the positives? What are the constraints? How are you going to build on the positives, and how are you going to handle the constraints? And preparedness is the means to that end. And preparedness isn't so much what I want to get us to think about is to get it away from it being a step-by-step process that we can manage on a daily basis. No, being prepared is about dealing with the exogenous craziness all around us, right? And that's that volatility, right? The train stops in the middle of a residential area in Mississauga. It blows up, one car blows up, all the other cars fall down, roll over, and guess what? We've got chlorine gas. Well, welcome to the fatal gases used during World War I. Excuse me? Where are we?
Exactly.
Have we learned nothing in history? No.
Nobody had that in their bingo cards for that day.
Yeah. So, and no matter how prepared you think you might be or might not be, we get back to the issue of in designing your life, would you want to live on a daily basis? Because it isn't something you want to live in the future. But you want to live on a daily basis. What are the major factors you need to keep in mind and be prepared for, whatever they are? By factors, I don't mean, the train blowing up. I'm just talking about, the everyday. You and I both noticed that we're going into drought season, especially out west. And Alberta has already, indicated that they're on high alert. Interesting, within the 24 hours after that, British Columbia did the same thing
Yeah.
because they were also on high alert. Um, we don't have to talk about climate change and this big issue. It is. Let's just start there without necessarily getting into the socio-political arguments around whether it is or isn't true. That's not the point. The point is that my branch of my family that are cattle ranchers in the foothills of the Rockies, outside of Okotoks, and which is outside of Calgary,
Mhm.
an hour and a half to 2 hours. They are their business. This is what I love about them. Their business is land management,
Yeah.
not cattle.
No.
People think cattle ranchers are all about beef. No, that's the end product.
Yeah.
It's the beef. So when they talk about being ranchers, they talk about managing the land. And their greatest challenge is always the land, the weather, the drought, natural grasses. When you say you've got a grass-fed product, i.e. the beef, then you better damn well have grass.
It's those things that are beyond your control that are the most
And
influential, right? And that's
exactly.
that when you're thinking about what the easiest thing to always start with is location.
Yeah,
You've chosen to live, like, for example, I have some friends who love Vancouver. I'm not a fan, but that's perfectly fine.
yeah,
You have to understand that when you've chosen to live in southwestern BC, you're exposed to a high risk
yeah,
of the probability of a significant earthquake event that is going to catastrophically change
yep,
how you live. You
yep,
you cannot.
right,
Well, you have absolutely the ability to ignore that exists, but you
yep,
do so at your own peril.
yeah, yeah,
I don't have that risk where I live right now. You don't have that risk where you live. I grew up in Halifax, Nova Scotia, where we had the risk of hurricanes, and a
yeah,
couple did smoke the city. Okay,
yeah,
it's understanding the risk to assume with it. But a lot of people in the preparedness idea, they go down this idea of I have to have an idea or strategy for a train derailment. I need one for an ice storm. I need one for a hurricane. I
yeah,
need one. And before you know it, you have 42 plans on the wall. You're
yeah,
spending hours and hours of time worried about
yeah,
this. And it
yeah,
becomes so
yeah,
time consuming within your life. It
yeah,
doesn't add any benefit or
yeah,
value.
yeah, yeah,
So what I always recommend is everything that we deal with in life is a spectrum. Very few things are binary, right?
yeah,
So the series of events that could happen to you in the city of Toronto fall along a spectrum. If you think of the far left of the spectrum being the most likely but the least dangerous, and the other
mm-hmm,
end of the spectrum being the most dangerous but the least likely.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And so if we can identify or quantify what those two events are at either ends of the spectrum and set people up for success for those, then
mm-hmm,
by default, you're going to be largely covered for the series of events that can come in the middle. And the basic starting point for that always is it, and you've mentioned both cases already. Number one is regular power outages. Now, for the vast majority of people, that is going to be inconsequential. Now, inconvenience, absolutely,
yes, yes,
but really in the matter of life, fairly inconsequential, unless you rely on a medical device to get
ah,
around, survive that requires power. There
yes,
are some people who have significant considerations for that, but at the
yep,
macro level of society, power outages are a pain in the butt, but you
yep,
need to be able to navigate them,
yep, yep,
right?
yep,
So, for example, another instance is The loss of TTC for some doesn't matter. For some that need TTC for their appointments and get to and
Yes.
from work every
Yes.
day, it
Yes.
is a critical loss
Yes.
and directly impactful.
Yes.
The far end of the spectrum, if you consider, is really evacuation.
Yes.
So the unplanned short notice abandoning of your home, the place that has everything you possess, where you feel safe and secure, and the location of your family, having to abandon that on very short notice, even when you may not be there, you may be at the Logistics Institute and
Mm-hmm.
Forest Hill gets evacuated.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do anything about what's in your house.
Mm-hmm.
It may be there, it
Mm-hmm.
may not.
Mm-hmm.
That is the most
Mm-hmm.
impactful
Mm-hmm.
decision.
Mm-hmm.
So the third one that I add to it all the time, and this is where I think preparedness emerges from that disaster frame, because everybody thinks preparedness sits in a framework of disaster response. That's all we're worried about. Economic loss.
Ah,
If you losing your primary source of income for a family, I'm going to argue is just as impactful
yeah.
as your house burning down,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
especially in today's economy
Oh yeah.
with a recession on the brow, where
Yeah.
employment rate is rising, and
Yeah.
you have a constrained labor market where less and less people are being hired, and you have a higher and higher number of human beings looking for work, right? And stagnation potentially, if you follow the news in the US today, may be coming out. So the point is that preparedness is far beyond disaster stuff. We can always talk about that, but I
Yes.
always call that the 20% solution.
Yes.
80% of preparedness lies in the world beyond disaster response.
Yes.
And the first one that I always use to talk to people about is the economic loss, losing your job. Everybody loses a job. You get fired, you die, you quit, or you retire. Everyone will stop doing the job they're doing now. Most of us hope that we'll do that on our own timeline and at a point that we choose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But if that doesn't happen, what's your plan? And that's how I challenge people to get their thinking out of disaster, to cross that
Yes.
lexicon barrier, for lack of a better
Yes.
term, into the
Yeah.
world of
Yes.
strategic thinking.
Yeah.
What is your intent when you get fired? When you show up in downtown Toronto Bay Street tomorrow and you are met in the lobby by security and HR.
Ah, yes.
Okay, because my brother used to work downtown
Oh
Ottawa
yeah. Oh
and
yeah.
or downtown Toronto, and it happened to him one day
Oh
or
yeah.
more than a couple of times
Oh
where you're
yeah.
met by HR. You
Yeah.
were ready, you were coming into work and ready to rock that PowerPoint you've been working on. You got a
Yeah.
great client presentation and you're fired.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, have yourself your 24-hour pity party. That's fine. We all get that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But write yourself. And the best example of this is the people who were successful in the pandemic.
Yeah.
The people who were laid off, had their employment ceased, and pivoted to something completely different and figured out a way to earn money
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
build something in the
Yeah.
middle of the pandemic. So I think for individuals day-to-day life, yeah, there's a couple of things we can always talk about, but I really think the benefit in preparedness as a frame is
Yes.
when we move
Yes.
beyond that
Yes. Yeah.
into now prepare. I
Yeah.
use preparedness as the frame for teaching strategic thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing, I go back to the designing for life. Uh, your advice to 20 to 23-year-olds. Yeah. Okay. Fine. You know, I don't have any 20-year-olds in my life. They're way beyond that. The youngest is now in their 40s. I mean, so let's just move on. That goes to show how old I am. As I was listening to you, I was thinking, oh, the preparedness is not, I agree, preparedness is not simply reacting to a potential situation. That's too reactionary.
Yeah.
You've got to get away from the reactionary approach to things. One of the things that I like to think about is, what are the patterns of my life? It's about identifying the patterns on how we actually live in order to identify those pain points when the pattern is potentially not going to work.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
all live in patterns. You know, I live in this city, you live in that city. You do this, I do that. And this is all part of our so-called value web,
Yeah.
because we find value in a woven tapestry. It isn't just me alone. There are stakeholders that I depend on, and they depend on me. Very simple case in point. Um, I went on the way home from work on Monday. Okay, I came to the office on Monday because I had a meeting. Uh, First thing that happened is there was I would say, a 5 second blackout. Boom! Right as I was sitting here going, whoa, and everything just stopped. Okay, all right. Of course, Victor is alone, and here I am wondering how to get the computer back up. That's the easy part, turning it back on and all that. So,
Yeah.
well, Wi-Fi was shut down. I said, what? I couldn't get into my cloud. I couldn't get into my files. I couldn't, and I was having a meeting, and most of those files were needed, and I'm going, whoa, what am I going to do here? And so I discovered all alone, nobody else had showed up, not even the people who sublet showed up. So I'm all alone. And we have, for whatever reason that none of us could figure out on Tuesday when we all got together, we have a surge protector, and the Wi-Fi is connected to the surge protector. We don't need a surge protector because there's no reason for it, but that's neither here nor there. Our tech guy said, I'll just put it in and make sure it's all taken care of. Well, the surge protector actually shorted out because it overloaded, actually was a better. And so it would not shut down. I did not want to start unplugging everything, because then the whole system would have died. And then I would have everybody lynch me the next day. So I sat here all day with this thing beeping and going, I don't need this. Had my meeting, survived it. But that's not hence that little issue around, how prepared are you? Totally unprepared. Totally. I just spent the whole day until the next day when someone came in and said, well, what if we unplug here and then plug it in over there? Oh, it works. Fine. As simple as that. But I'm going back to this issue of patterns, or what I raised, this notion of patterns, because I go home and I want to go to Loblaws or grocery shopping because I have a few things that I need to buy. Not a lot, just a few things. And there was no compulsion. I could have waited a few days, but I'm there. I walk in Monday. That's when I discovered it's the worst time to go into a large grocery store. All the shelves were empty.
Yeah.
I went, you idiot, you should know this. They don't reshelve things or replenish the shelves until Tuesday, Wednesday. Monday is the weekend. It's over. And I went, wow, this was a waste of time. But not recognizing or being having at my fingertips, and you don't have to have it at your fingertips all the time, but the pattern came to mind because it didn't work. I didn't recognize it, not that the pattern didn't work.
Yeah. And you were doing something outside your normal pattern of life.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And I think that's the beauty, is that, especially and you see this in a bit in the debate about climate and the use of the environment, is that, there's a great piece in the Line, a publication that I subscribe to, and I do support Canadian journalism. I actually pay 3 subscriptions to Canadian journalism, to Terry Glavin, um, Sam Cooper, who was the individual who was in the Globe and released the stuff on CSIS and the Chinese meddling in Canadian elections. And then he started a private company called the Bureau. And this other one with his Line. Anyhow, they did a great piece on the fact that there's a push for high density living because it's easier on the environment. But what about us who don't want to live like that? What about us who want to live in suburbia? We want 1 acre lots with our home and our yards.
Hmm.
We want
Hmm.
big box stores to drive to, and we want to use our car for everything.
Hmm.
And we have every right to do that in the country just as much as people have every right to choose to live in high density housing, et cetera. And
Right.
so if we take the your right and what is the quote unquote proper way to
Yeah.
live in a modern society and say, okay, and one of the things that I talk to people about is if you're trying to figure out, and I think a way to do this is to look at risk. And if we talk about risk and risk profile,
Mm.
each one of us have a different risk profile
Hmm.
based upon a whole bunch of variables and outside influences. So location is one, where you live. Uh, One that we don't talk about but is true is risk tolerance. You and I have a different risk tolerance.
Totally.
You may be happy climbing a ladder without a safety line, and I may want 2 safety lines and a
Yeah.
spotter,
Yeah. Yeah.
but we're still executing the very same task because we have
Yep.
different levels of risk tolerance. And so, but a lot of people don't understand, and it gets back to what I said before about you don't know the risks that you're associated to every day. And
No.
so, what I try to say is, I go back to the use of critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
We live in a technologically enabled modern
Yep.
society. And I like
Yep.
to think of it as you take a desktop and the city of Toronto sits on top of it.
Yep.
Underneath it are 10 legs representative of each sector of critical infrastructure
Right.
that keep that society running. They're
Mm.
below everybody's sight line. Nobody pays attention.
Right.
Nobody calls up the water company in the morning to make sure that the water's good.
Yes.
You know,
Right.
like those calls don't get made, right? So
Right.
we all make these assumptions that it's running. And so what I've said to people before is, you can always take an opportunity to look at your exposure to and your dependency on a sector of critical infrastructure. So one, for example, may be healthcare.
Yeah.
Your and my health is going to be different. Those 20 something Gen Zs we're talking about, their
Yeah.
health is different. So
Yep.
their reliance, their exposure to and dependency on the healthcare system is going to look different than
Yep.
yours and mine,
Yep.
which is why the very same healthcare sector may be perfectly fine and a
Yeah.
non-issue for a
Yeah.
22-year-old,
Yes.
whereas a 75 or a
Yep.
55-year-old individual
Yes.
is going to have a different frame on that.
Yep.
And so by looking at your exposure to and your dependency on
Yep.
those sectors of critical infrastructure, you build a personal risk profile.
Yep.
Then you look at that list of possible bad things and
Hmm.
through
Hmm.
your own personal lens, like those old Disney things we used to use that flip
Oh,
the screen on them, right? But it's your own lens. You look at a
exactly.
series of possible events through what you tolerate well and what you don't tolerate well. And you kind of understand the risk that you have. And then you can make an informed decision. Hey, do I want to do anything about this or don't
Exactly.
I want to do anything about
Yes.
this?
Yes.
That gets back to what I was saying
Yes.
about designing your life,
Yeah. I
right?
agree. Yeah.
Okay. So we had a public transit is my favorite because a lot of people don't understand how many people in a city depend on the use of public transit every
Hmm.
day to just earn an income.
Hmm.
We had a strike not all that long. Well,
Yeah.
uh, 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago in Ottawa,
Yeah.
we had a pretty
Yeah.
significant transit strike. Everybody realized on day one the amount of people that took public transit because they all took their cars to work.
Exactly.
And it was 3.5 hours to get into my job in the morning on a
Hmm.
45-minute commute.
Hmm.
And so while the loss of to you and to me, public transit could shut down, it doesn't have any impact. I don't use it. Like it's if it's not there until everybody that does use it has to jump out onto
Hmm.
the road and get around. But it's understanding you've chosen to live in a location that has a certain set of natural risks, but there's a whole bunch of other risks.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it all depends on how finite a picture that people want to paint.
Yeah.
Some
Yeah.
people are good with broad strokes.
Yep.
Again, it gets back to personality. Some people want the very finite
Yes.
step by
Yeah.
step
Yeah.
details.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want to know the 21 risks that I'm exposed to right now, because I'm going to go over here and make a 21
Yeah.
response list as how I'm going to mitigate those.
Yeah. 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 By the way, that Walt Disney thing was called a viewfinder.
There you go. See?
I am that old.
Yeah, I
Okay,
remember
I
it too.
am that old.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, interesting. Among the things, just thinking of my own limited experience, and I shock young people in particular when I say this. I've never owned a car in my life. And people look at me. I've been driving since I was 18, which is about the time when Noah was building his ark, but
Yeah.
that's different. But I've never owned a car, ever. I either rent or whatever I need to do and I love to drive, by the way. So it isn't a case of I'm anti-vehicle or anti-car. That's not the point. The point is, because you mentioned it, or alluded to it, I've always lived in big cities, public transit.
Mm-hmm.
That is my primary means on an everyday basis. Now, I'm also a whiner and I whine about the TTC as everybody does. But at the same time, I got nervous over the weekend because there was a report that they were in final negotiations to determine whether TTC employees were going to go out on strike. And I immediately thought, well, what am I going to do?
Yep.
I can't go anywhere in the city. Okay, I could do Uber, but who else does Uber when there's no TTC? Everybody.
And it's a supply and demand. So now your Uber's $400.
Oh, tell me about it. I
Yeah.
mean, and you just go, I had to think about this. What are you going to do if?
Yeah. That's the key question, right? And the big events that impact on you, what are you going to do if?
Exactly. And while we can never super plan what it is, nonetheless, we have to be aware that there are patterns that we live in and live by that need to be recognized by us. We've made choices. I've chosen to live in big cities where I have access to public transportation at all times, or as often as I can. That's why when I had that 1.5 years in Mississauga, which has got one of the worst public transit systems in the universe, it drove me crazy because I couldn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
I was stuck.
Yeah.
Whereas even when I lived in Hamilton, when I was teaching at the university and I lived in downtown Hamilton, often enough, I could still get to wherever I needed to go. I could get to the market, I could get to Westdale, I could get to the university, I could do my teaching, I could still get home, and so on and so forth. Yeah, because there's a fairly strong bus system in Hamilton. There is no subway, but there's a bus system in Hamilton. And you go, when I go visit family in London, and you and I talk about this, it's the Via, it's the train. Why?
Yeah.
We love trains.
Love it.
I
Love trains.
I mean, why not? Why wouldn't we do that? Oh, trains are so old fashioned. Why do you need to do a train? Well, just short of my getting on a horse, that's my preferred way of doing it.
I live in the city of Ottawa. How do I get to London, Ontario? It's probably an 8-hour drive, or more.
Yeah.
And it's 8 hours on Via. Just think about that for a second.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Do I want now, of course, I am unapologetically at the front of the rail car.
Oh, so long.
Bougie setting, right? So
yeah.
So I'm sitting down, I'm being well fed, I'm being well served. I have a comfortable wide chair.
Yeah.
The Wi-Fi is great.
Yep.
I had an opportunity to ride the new Via Rail.
I haven't been on those yet. Yes.
There are 4 power outlets in business class per seat. So I think you'll be okay. I've got a tray table for my drink and a fold down table for my laptop.
There you go.
Or I can sit on the 401 in my car.
Right.
But still, if I was going to fly, it's still faster and cheaper as
Yeah.
long as you book far enough advance.
Yeah.
Cheaper. And we, for some crazy compared to the Europeans, we do such a horrible job of supporting our rail system,
Yeah.
our passenger rail.
Oh yeah. Oh
I
yeah.
mean, I don't get me wrong. I've traveled via now for a couple of years on this Ottawa to London. Now most of their trains have to run a second business class car
Yes.
because they're booked,
Yeah, they were. I
right?
know.
I unless I book like 5 or 6 weeks out on a lot
Yeah.
of trains, I have trouble finding a business class seat,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and it's not a price thing because if you book far enough advance, it's really about double what you can get out of economy. But
Yeah. Yeah.
um, people use it, but it used to be so much more frequent, more present in our communities. And when we
Yeah.
switched to
Yeah.
the car mode
Yeah.
and the trucking mode of
Yeah.
logistics,
Oh yeah.
logistics moved to the truck from the train because
Yeah.
logistics, the last mile used to be trucking
That's right.
or unique cargo that required separate type of handling. But
Right. That's different.
freight, general freight was a sea
Sure.
lift to rail lift
That's
to
right.
last mile logistics on the truck.
Yeah.
That is fundamentally changed
Oh, totally.
to
Totally.
where everything is almost sea to truck.
Yes. Exactly.
And
Exactly.
it's really changing the way uh and the fact that we're urbanizing. I mean, look at the race to urbanize in this country and every other country. So as we build more and more cities that are becoming larger and larger, and more of the Canadian cities are reaching the 1 million population, you're ever increasing the number of risks that are present in
Ah,
society.
yes.
And we're
Yes.
not having those
Yes.
conversations
Yes.
about living in the, like, there's a couple of people that say they live the condo life in Toronto, and they would never choose anything else. Why would they ever want to shovel? Why
That's
would
right.
they ever want to mow grass? Like, they're living there. And this is about designing your life. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know what? I remember, I don't know how many years ago it was, we went to that golf tournament, the logistics golf tournament north of
Yeah.
Toronto,
Yeah.
talking about being in a golf course out in the middle of farmland somewhere,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But that was fantastic. But not everybody wants to live like that.
Mhm.
Everybody, your lifestyle, my lifestyle, where I choose, how I want to live my life, the fact that I want to earn my income from my basement and not at a business location, brick and
Mhm.
mortar, it's all individual.
Mhm.
We're fighting an uphill battle, I think, about the ideology of the government is there to save me. And
Exactly.
we turn to that regularly as our collective society as a default now to handle socioeconomic, political problems as they pop up.
Yep.
And this is, just one of the things that I say about preparedness all the time is that, um, yeah, disasters exist, but I think the exogenous shocks are more important in the political field, in the economic field,
Yeah.
and in the international field by
Yeah.
far. Those
Yeah.
are going to impact you
Yeah.
specifically in Toronto and how you intend to execute your life far more than a
Yeah.
flood on the Don River.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Like, seriously.
Well, I go back to what I said earlier that many of us live out of our assumptions. That's our
Yeah.
fail-safe. That's what we do. Don't have to think about it. Don't ask me to create my own risk profile. Although, risk profile, it sounds so technical. Risk profile, folks, quite frankly, a risk profile is I choose to live in urban areas. Automatically, I have to recognize what are the patterns and how do I choose to live. When I decide to go grocery shopping at a very large grocery store, one of the big chains, on a Monday, and forget that the pattern is there's going to be nothing on the
Yeah.
shelves,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Then I have worked from an assumption that it will always be there. Well, it won't. Right. And one could almost raise the question about who the panic over toilet paper in during the pandemic, during the was it the photographs taken by the journalists on the days when they knew there wouldn't be anything on the shelves anyway? Or did they go back 2 days later, say if they went in on Monday, yes, they'll be depleted, but if you go in on Wednesday, everything will be, all the shelves will be filled. Did we really run out of toilet paper, or was that what the press told us that we did was, and therefore we had to panic in order to respond to what we were being told? You know, the assumption on the one hand, well, everything is going to be fine, perfect, because I live in a fine, perfect world. And the other is dependencies. We depend on government. They're gonna solve all our problems. And if they don't, then it's their fault.
Yep.
No, it's not their fault. Sorry. Okay. At what point do you recognize that you are responsible for your own life and the life of the people around you? You can't just go into dependency mode because it's convenient or because you didn't know what to do to begin with. Come on.
I think it's that last point you said, the people around you. And I think this is where we've had an issue, especially in the emergency management space, that I'm pushing back against. The paradigm I'm trying to crack is that we used to be a community. Community solved the problems that we now expect government to solve.
Yes.
We've switched to a society of individuals. And I say this when I look at the government emergency preparedness communications. So the communications that the government sends out to residents to be prepared for disasters are designed to make you victims. Now, good victims, but victims nonetheless.
Though. Yes. Oh, yeah.
As individuals. So they're sending out a message to 200 families on a street to have 200 individual sets of victims instead of a message sent to the collective. This is how you get together to solve the issue yourselves.
Yes.
And you can speak to it. It's things like, why do we keep demanding higher amounts of security on the TTC to deal with cultural and societal problems when those never used to exist, because culturally and society, those types of behaviors were not acceptable and were not tolerated by everybody else. Right? Now we need somebody else to step in and try to insert the norm that we used to maintain by having a sense of community. And so I've said to this, you and I have talked about this before, where I grew up in a townhouse development in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and everybody on the street knew everybody by first name. Now, in that day, it was Mr. and Mrs. Sir, ma'am, different culture, but everybody knew each other and we knew about each other. So when events occurred, you knew that the elderly lady in the end unit townhouse didn't have any family in the city. So on day 2 of a power outage, you went to knock on her door to make sure she was okay or needed anything. Because you had a sense of community, a strength of social capital. We don't have that anymore. We don't know our neighbors anymore. We don't build community. So as community responsibility went down, government dependency, the antonym to that, rose. And so it's like, if we look at what is the one remaining social program that works, and I would argue with you that's food banks. Not the fact that we need them.
No.
That's a different question.
No.
They work because it's the community voluntarily feeding the community. They're not government run. They're not government funded. They're run by us, for us. We simply give money or we give food because there are people in our community who are struggling to feed themselves. That is what I use food banks all the time as the expression of the vast majority of social situations that we turn to the government to solve can be solved in the community itself within community resources. But we have this dependency that's gone. Every time something pops up, we need a government program.
Interesting. It's almost like the 3 words that I wrote down here. We live and work out of assumptions. and usually positive, looking at the world with rose-colored glasses. So the assumption is everything is going to be wonderful.
Yeah.
And then part of the assumption is also substitutions. Someone else will take care of this.
Hmm.
And it's got to be somebody big because we live in complex, very large societies. Therefore, it's got to be government.
Yeah.
So there's the substitution. And then we become dependent. As soon as you embrace the fact that someone else is going to do it, then you depend on them to do it.
Yeah. And you
And
take that into your reality.
exactly, your reality is built around assumptions, substitutions, and dependencies.
Yeah.
Going back to what you said earlier, it's not about designing your life. It's about, I'm going to use the term, surrendering.
Yeah, absolutely.
We live in a world where it's easier, not safer, but easier, easier from an ego point of view, easier simply to surrender to have someone else be responsible for. So we're surrendering our responsibility.
So
Yeah,
many of our things that we used to do
exactly,
and used to be personally responsible for.
exactly,
I
exactly.
argue, this is kind of akin to an argument I got with somebody online, and every once in a while you can get into a healthy one, not a Twitter fight, but an actual healthy debate. And it was about the healthcare system. And
Ah,
I was advocating the last thing we ever need to do is give that system another dollar. Like the healthcare system does not suffer from a lack of funding in the province of
yeah,
Ontario
yeah.
at all, not at all. What we have is a sick population, and
Ah,
nobody's interested in making the population
ah,
healthier.
yeah,
Roll
okay,
back the participation ads from the 1970s and 80s,
yeah,
and this
yeah,
35-year-old Swede, 35-year-old Canadian is as healthy as a 65-year-old Swede.
yeah,
And I remember that commercial of Buddy running around in his blue tracksuit. And the point is that the problem with the Canadian healthcare system, as I see it, is not the state of the healthcare system. It's the unhealthy state of the Canadian population
yeah,
because
yeah,
we've given up personal responsibility for our
yeah,
physical and our mental health.
yeah,
Now, that
yeah.
doesn't mean you don't need help.
No,
No,
no, no,
that
no, no.
means I don't take responsibility,
Yes, yes.
Um, you can look at the obesity epidemic in the United States of America and
Mhm,
look at national security.
mhm.
There's been more than a few generals and retired generals that say if we had to go to war, we could not field the army we want
No,
because the population is too large to fit literally into the military.
yes,
And so the secondary and tertiary effects of that transferring of responsibility means if you're not responsible for the outcomes, then the outcomes itself has a secondary effect. And
yeah,
now
yeah,
you've got a very sick population in this
yeah,
country, and
yeah,
nobody look at the money spent on public health versus emergency rooms, right?
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
ridiculous idea that it's bad to feed kids in school. I mean, I get the politics of it and I get the different levels of government fighting over it. That's all politics. But the idea, and I come from one of my military postings was in a small rural New Brunswick town. And we had everybody from six-figure incomes to four-figure incomes in their family.
Mm,
We fed breakfast to every kid at the school.
mhm,
No questions asked. Every kid ate breakfast together when the school buses arrived because
mhm,
everybody was school. It was rural, so everybody was bused.
mhm,
Everybody got toast and pancakes and juice. And you know what? Those that had money paid for it.
mhm.
Those that didn't were likely the volunteers who did the flipping of the
I was just gonna
pancakes and
say,
the making of the sandwiches.
they paid, but in a different way.
We all contributed to make sure every kid in that community had a hot breakfast and a
Yeah,
delicious, nutritious start to their day.
yeah.
Um, why that needs government intervention in today's world, I
No,
don't.
no,
It blows my mind,
yeah, it's a
right?
community thing. Yeah. Oh, I
Like
agree.
that's a community issue. Why is the government involved in feeding kids in school?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But that is a symptom of the decision, and like you said, to transfer that
Oh, yeah.
responsibility
Oh, yeah.
away from the individual, away
Totally.
from the
Yeah,
community,
Yeah.
and off to the government. And now, taking political ideology aside, we're now facing the repercussions of the necessarily large government
Yes.
expenditures to
Yes.
support all of these ideas
Yes.
that
Yes.
we've transferred to the government.
Yeah.
Now we're getting the secondary effects of
Yeah.
that
No, I agree.
with massive interest payments on a
Yes.
national debt. And
Yeah.
people like, well, that's bad. Well, yeah, it is bad, but you asked for this because you
Exactly.
wanted the government to solve all the problems.
Yep. Yep.
But what you didn't want to do is pay more money.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
how did you think the government, good, bad, or indifferent decisions aside, how
Yeah.
did you think they were going to pay for all this magic stuff you wanted? Right. And so we
They're going
don't,
to print money in the basement, weren't they?
something like that. And they just like,
No.
what's that joke? They make it rain. They just made it
Yeah.
rain everywhere.
Yeah.
And now there's a freaking thunderstorm, a tornado going through the middle of the
Yeah.
economy.
I
We're
know.
like,
I know.
sorry, folks. This is, I'm unapologetically blunt with people saying you got exactly what you asked for.
Yeah.
This is the result of exactly what you asked for.
Yeah.
And so problems we used to solve in a community
Yeah.
don't solve in a community. We don't actually live in communities anymore.
No.
And
No.
my main effort, the effort of all of my research and everything that I did in my PhD was about the value of social capital in municipalities and
Yeah.
communities.
Yeah.
How do we restart that
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
linkage
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
people in their community to where, if
Yeah.
somebody's struggling, the street just feeds them. Like, why is that a bad thing?
Yeah.
Why would we think that it's a government's responsibility to feed somebody when it's really ours? You wouldn't sit there and have dinner at night knowing the neighbor next door hasn't eaten in a day
No, that's right. That's right.
and,
Um,
and say, oh, the government owes them a check.
yeah, that gets us, to put these ideas back into a business context. For example, it's the basis of what I like to think about as stakeholder economics. In business, we always deal with the shareholder and the stock market and all that stuff. That's fine. There's nothing wrong. I'm not about to say, get rid of all that. That's not the point. The point I like to stress is who are the stakeholders in the community that you depend on and they depend on you for their economic well-being, right? Well, it even goes beyond economics. If you have an operation, doesn't matter what kind it is, let's say you have a distribution center in a location, and there's a gas station and a small mom and pop operation and a restaurant and a whatever. And if you decide that you're not going to deal with any of those people, you're going to go somewhere else for your gas, somewhere else for your food, somewhere else for the whatever, and you're going to demand that your people, your workers, do the same thing, right? What happens to the infrastructure around you? What happens to the economic infrastructure around you? Do you not realize that you need those people? They are feeding your people. They are providing you with fuel. They are doing what needs to be done for you, for your success. What are you doing for their success?
Yep. It's so intertwined.
Totally. It's the value web. It's the pattern. You don't work in isolation. And what happens inside the four walls of your organization, your company, or even your home is not the sum and substance of absolutely everything. There's a life outside the four walls.
Outside the box. Yeah.
Yeah. And even if you don't participate in that life, that's your choice. Nonetheless, you need what's going on outside. Otherwise, what goes on inside is irrelevant. It's not going to last very long. It's short term.
Oh, by far. And this is
Yeah.
links to a discussion I had online with a couple of people about the high food prices.
Mhm.
And I'm like, okay, what do you do to mitigate that? Well, you have two choices. You can down market, which a lot of people do. They go to Dollarama, Dollar General, parts of Walmart to buy no name food. change their diet. I said, what I do is I buy local, dead local. Like
Mm.
I not follow, but by default, I fit into that 100-mile diet fad that was around for a longest time. Like my vegetables come from a farm 33.5 kilometers from my front door.
Mhm.
So yeah, Florida and California could have a drought and a frost, and I could care less because I don't consume anything out of there.
Yeah,
All of my vegetables that I
yeah,
eat, because I eat seasonally, all of my vegetables come out of this farm. And then there's another farm a little further away, about 50 kilometers away, that runs a year-round greenhouse. And I subscribe to, or I used to subscribe to, a consumer-supported agriculture. So I pay the farmer, $800 in January. And so then I get, starting in the end of June, beginning of July, I get 13 weekly boxes of fresh vegetables. So the
mhm,
farmer and I together assume the risk. If it's
yeah,
a boomer crop, I get tons of stuff. If it's
right,
a bad crop, I get less stuff. Same price. I paid in
yeah, yeah,
January,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so all of my vegetables come local. All of my meat, and I eat tons of steak, unapologetically carnivore, um, comes from the Ottawa Valley
oh, okay,
producers.
okay,
So I get it directly from farms in the
yeah,
Ottawa Valley,
yeah,
which are within 150 kilometers of my home.
yeah,
So my vegetables and my meat and my dairy products come from within 100 miles of where I purchase and support local food,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so yeah, I'm not really that concerned about the global food environment. I understand its implications, blah blah blah.
yeah,
My folks
yeah,
are fine, right?
yeah,
So I found that that is cheaper than going to
yeah,
Loblaws.
oh, yeah, yeah. In some senses, I wish I could do that. There are parts of me that wishes I could contact my really great friends in outside of Okotoks who have refrigerators filled with beef. When you go visit them, that's what you're going to eat. Period.
Yep.
I love beef.
Oh
I
yeah.
do. I
Can't
mean,
get enough.
come on, will you? Like, what else is there? Chicken? Yeah, okay, fine. But beef?
When
Give
you
me
when you run out of beef, there is chicken. Yep.
yeah, well, yeah. And you could do pork and lamb, but that's a little riskier. I prefer beef,
Yep.
give me a nice rare steak any day. I wish I could get them to ship it to me on a regular basis because I know it comes straight from the ranch.
So you should try the service that I use, and you can buy a quarter of a cow at a time. And if you don't have it, they'll sell you the freezer to put it in,
Okay.
and they
All
deliver it.
right. Now we're doing commercials. Okay.
But without naming the company itself, the
No,
point,
no, no, no. I
you know,
know. I know.
the
I know.
the
I know.
idea is that if you're interested in securing, again, from a
Yeah.
preparedness risk
Yes.
perspective and an economic perspective of,
Yeah.
if you're looking to secure a low cost, low risk source of regular high protein and
Mhm.
vegetables, you can do that locally through non-traditional
Mhm.
thing. There's
Oh,
another great example of where somebody put together a street-wide, and this is again the social capital. They had a bunch of friends on the street. You know that food company Suarto, or anyhow,
the cheese group.
yeah, whatever they are.
Yeah.
Anyhow, they you can order bulk. So the community would order their food in 60-pound bags of beans, right? 60-pound bags of rice, 60-pound bags of flour at
Yeah.
super reduced pricing.
Mhm.
And then had a little party in somebody's garage where it was delivered,
And divvy
and,
it up.
divided it up. So
Yep. Yep.
I don't buy this idea that you're struggling and straining significantly because of high prices. There's just a lack of individual ingenuity
Yes.
about, because I can feed a human being in Canada on $2 a day and meet their nutritional profile.
Yes. Yes. Again, we work out of assumptions
Yes.
and dependencies.
Yeah. Because, and as you said, I have a pattern. This is where I go to buy my
Exactly.
vegetables.
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
go to Loblaws on a Wednesday because the store shelves are stocked. I go on Wednesdays to, and if the prices are high, I have to pay it because I go to Loblaws on Wednesdays
Yeah.
to buy
Yes.
my food. You
Yeah.
get into that type of pattern.
Exactly.
And then
Exactly.
when the problem presents itself, your solution is I need to get mad at Galen Weston. I need to get mad at everybody else. And somebody needs to cut me a check because the prices are higher.
No, and if it gets to that point, then my strong suggestion, and it doesn't, I would never suggest this to people, but I would just say, oh, please go grow your own. Leave me alone. Jeez.
Yep.
One of my neighbors last year, before his baby was born, so I don't think it's going to happen this year. He planted all kinds of. We have a rooftop garden, and he planted all kinds of things, lettuces and so on and so forth. And it was a hoot. I mean, I thought it was just great. Of course, some people got angry because he wasn't planting flowers. What is this? Tomatoes and so on and so forth. And I looked at them saying, what are you talking about? It's food. What is a marigold going to do for you? Okay, it ain't going to do much. But what was great was that there was so much food left over that I had all of my salads taken care of. I had all of my, I would just go up there and say, okay, I'm going to do my farming, and here it is. I'm going to do my, bring the crops in, and that's what I'm going to cook. And it was wonderful. I suspect it's not going to happen again this year, but there you go. And we're talking about a plot that is not even half the size of my office. So we're
Yeah.
talking about something really small.
Well, you don't need a huge amount of space at
You
all.
don't, no, you don't.
No.
You don't.
And if you think about, somebody told me this, and I don't know if this is true, but somebody said, we're modernizing at an incredible rate. 50 years ago, we didn't have indoor hot showers. We're not normal in most parts of the developed world, maybe 70 years, but it hasn't been that long. When traditionally you ate with the food, you ate with the seasons. So
Yes.
you had a massive harvest, a massive bounty in the fall. You
Yep.
preserved through the winter, and the
Yep.
spring was often referred to as the starving season
Yes.
because
Yes.
nothing had grown yet.
Yes.
Um, but nature provides food for the animals. Like I've spent my entire life as an outdoorsman, and every season you're in the bush, there's food all around you for the animals to survive, right? Because they're not all carnivores. So all of
No.
the animals are surviving around you, and there's tons of food. You just don't know how to look, and we've lost that ability to not that I'm saying you should be naturally foraging in the Don Valley looking for supper,
Oh
but
no, please.
no. But the point is that for hundreds of thousands of years, humanity has to some degree existed in that kind of world where we've harvested, we've sought out food sources, we've found them, we've got them, we've preserved them. We, again, took a personal level of responsibility for our feeding our families and ourselves. And we executed that through various different methodologies. And now with the technological society, we're in a position where we have an assumption that absolutely everything will be turned on, working perfectly fine. And then when it's not, it's a catastrophic event that somebody else
Exactly.
has to step in. And so when I talk about preparedness, I'm like, yeah, the basic stuff is to be able to cover any gap in services for the critical infrastructure. Is a simple start line if people are interested. I said, but really preparedness, you need to be able to design your life. You need to be able to set the conditions for your own success. And then get to the point where you say, okay, there are some, there's a lot of, it's like the Stoic philosophers say, we're in control of so little, but that is precisely enough.
Yes.
And to say, you know what, it's not that I'm ready for everything that could happen to me. I have the cognitive ability to navigate whatever might happen
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah. Well, one of the big challenges going forward, and maybe this is the discussion for the next time when we
Yeah.
get together, is we live in a highly dependent consumer society. We live, we're not all Kardashians, thankfully, But that doesn't mean we're too far away from being Kardashians in our hopes, desires, and
Yeah.
wants. One of the arguments, not arguments, I was called in to a meeting to discuss at the provincial level, how are we going to handle the pollution because of the increase in traffic, especially from trucking. And this became a bomb throwing act where, of course, everybody was blaming the truckers for doing absolutely everything and increasing the number of fatalities and the crowding on the roads and the this and the that and the other and the other. And we alluded to that. You alluded to that, where we went from train to move cargo to trucks. And being somewhat the fool that I am, I tend to stand up and just say what's on my mind, rather than, but I do think about it. I don't necessarily just, there's not a gap between what's up here and what's here sometimes. And I said, listen, the root of the problem is not truckers, and it's not trucking, and it's not the trucking companies. It's the consumer society that demands product immediately, anytime, all the time.
Yeah.
So are we prepared to look at that seriously? And if we're not, then why are you blaming the truckers? They're just a convenient outlet for what you think is a problem. The problem is much bigger than too many trucks on the road. The reason why there are too many trucks on the road is because we as consumers demand to have the product when we want it at our convenience. So it's a bigger issue.
And it's very much like what I presented about healthcare. Are we willing to have the tough conversation about looking ourselves in the mirror and asking each one of us individually, asking, am I keeping myself in a strong physical and mental state so that I am less of a burden to my own society?
Exactly.
If we're not willing to have those hard conversations, then we're going to be consistently chasing our tails, trying to solve the symptoms, but not the cause.
Exactly. And that's what this whole meeting was about, was we're going to point fingers at the symptom because it's the trucker's fault.
Yeah.
It's everybody in this room who decided they needed to go to a grocery store in the middle of January to buy bananas that were imported from Nicaragua. And they all looked at me and they went, oh.
And then they're angry when they're green.
And they, oh, well, they're not served. They're not put on the shelf green. I already went through that with Loblaws. They're actually there's a chemical process to ripen them, so that they're not as hard as this wooden desk. But that's a whole other issue.
Scary issue.
But the issue, to me, we're talking about something much bigger than just the Band-Aid solutions to what we consider the problems when they're actually just symptoms. They're not the root cause.
Yeah.
And sadly, I'm going to say, and maybe this is not the best way to end this discussion, that I do not see society changing all that much.
And I will give you the opposite. I'm the optimist. I think we're at the cusp where we're going to see a significant change. And I think that's the perfect point to then take this to the next round, because you and I are going to approach that from different avenues. I think we're at the point of change.
Okay. You're more of an optimist than I am.
Yep.
And it's probably a factor of age. I've actually, all right, I won't go down that road. There is a part of me that doesn't give a damn anymore. I just don't care.
Let it burn.
Let it burn. I'm going to be dead anyway. It's not my problem.
I have enough steaks in the freezer. Let it burn.
Yes. Jeff, as always.
Yeah.
I'm glad we were able to do this.
Pleasure.
Let's schedule our next one and then we'll take it from there.
Perfect.